On March 12, 2020, on the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, a quiet and unassuming day turned dark. A construction worker minding his own business nearby stumbled upon a terrifying scene and immediately called emergency services. What initially appeared to be an accident was, in fact, a deliberate and horrific execution. This wasn't just about death. It was about how far someone would go to protect their hidden world and the monsters they would unleash to do it. Holly Williams, born Holly Ann Williams on January 14, 1987 in Nashville, was a confident woman. Friends described her in contrasting terms. Some saw her as a kind-hearted and modest soul, while others spoke of her as fiercely independent and strong-willed. Holly had always been captivated by beauty. She saw artistry in the world around her and was drawn to creative expression from a young age. Her passion for aesthetics and beautification led her to pursue a career in the beauty industry. By mid-2017, Holly graduated from the Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro, earning her cosmetology license by September of the same year. With great ambition and determination, she launched her own business, Shine Aesthetics, where she specialized in makeup, skincare treatments, and eyelash extensions. Her beauty salon was not just a business, it was an extension of who she was. Holly herself was the very embodiment of the brand, stylish, polished, and always exuding warmth. Her clients admired her not just for her professional skills, but for the care and passion she infused into her work. A friend once remarked how exceptional Holly was at her craft, noting that her drive and enthusiasm made her shine in more ways than one. Despite her flourishing career, Holly's personal life was much more complicated, especially when it came to her relationship with William Lanway. William, or Bill as most called him, had a life marked by tumult. Born on March 17, 1983 in Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee, his early childhood was shadowed by tragedy. At just 3.5 years old, he witnessed the violent death of his mother, Candy K. Williams, who was brutally murdered by his father, Lyle Lanway. The murder happened in their home, nearly before Bill's eyes. His father, tormented by jealousy or mental instability, had threatened to shoot both his wife and son before finally taking Candy's life with a knife. This horrific event left an indelible mark on young Bill, and from that moment on, his upbringing fell to his relatives, who raised him with love and care, attempting to shield him from further emotional damage. As Bill grew older, he tried to lead a normal life. At the age of 20, he married Dana Rucker, and the couple welcomed a daughter, Madison, into the world 3 years later. The birth of his daughter seemed to bring some light into Bill's otherwise difficult life. Madison was cherished deeply by her parents, but in another cruel twist of fate, the young girl was diagnosed with brain cancer. Despite their best efforts and numerous treatments, Madison passed away on September 21, 2011. This loss devastated Bill, who spiraled into grief and depression. The strain on his marriage with Dana became too great, and the couple eventually divorced. From that point on, Bill's life was punctuated by emotional turmoil. Friends and family noted that he became more withdrawn, often concealing his emotions behind a facade of quiet composure. But underneath that exterior, there was a constant battle with his inner demons. His outbursts of aggression and nervous breakdowns became more frequent, and it was clear to those close to him that he was struggling. Yet he found solace in his work as a mechanic. Bill's hands-on work provided a distraction from his pain, and the routine of fixing cars helped him to maintain some semblance of stability. It is worth noting that Bill's character seemed to transform in social settings. Whenever he attended parties or spent time in bars, his usually reserved and troubled demeanor gave way to a more lively and charismatic persona. In these moments, he became cheerful, sociable, and seemingly carefree. It was in such settings that he and Holly initially bonded. When Bill met Holly Williams, it seemed like life was offering him another chance at happiness. Their attraction to each other was immediate, and the pair soon began dating. In the early days, their relationship appeared to be smooth and full of affection. They spent a great deal of time together, and those around them believed they were a happy couple. However, as time went on, the dynamic between them shifted. Their relationship quickly revealed its dark side. What began as an exciting romance with grand gestures and passionate affection soon turned into a cycle of jealousy, manipulation, and emotional swings. Bill, still grappling with unresolved trauma from his childhood and the loss of his daughter, displayed erratic behavior. His intense emotions often spilled over into their relationship, with bouts of jealousy leading to heated arguments. The carefree nature of their romance eroded, replaced by tension and volatility. Despite these ups and downs, Bill had a way of reeling Holly back in with apologies, gifts, and promises to change, perpetuating a toxic dynamic that neither seemed able to escape. As their relationship progressed, Bill's behavior grew more troubling. He provoked quarrels over minor issues, and his temper escalated to the point where he physically assaulted Holly on more than one occasion. Holly, who had once seen a future with him, began to fear for her safety. When she eventually decided it was time to leave the toxic relationship, Bill resorted to manipulative tactics to keep her close. He used his deceased daughter from a previous marriage as emotional leverage, making Holly feel guilty for wanting to leave him in his time of need. While Holly sympathized with his grief and inner turmoil, her patience was not limitless. She tried to support him as long as she could, but Bill's instability only deepened, and her attempts to distance herself were met with increased aggression. His desperation grew, and with it, his violent tendencies. Holly, who was fiercely independent and focused on her career, found herself repeatedly drawn back to Bill. Perhaps she believed that she could help him heal, or perhaps she was simply caught in the emotional roller coaster that defined their relationship. One incident in particular pushed Holly to her breaking point. After returning home from work one day, she discovered her beloved dog dead. The pet had shown no signs of illness, and its sudden death raised immediate suspicions in Holly's mind. Bill denied any involvement, but Holly was certain that it was an act of revenge, meant to punish her for trying to leave him. The incident solidified her fears, making her realize that staying with him would put her life in danger. This marked the definitive end of their relationship, but Bill refused to accept the breakup. He continued to stalk and harass her, calling her incessantly and showing up at her home unannounced. Their toxic relationship reached a critical point one day when a heated altercation led to police intervention. Bill was arrested and charged with aggravated assault and kidnapping after attempting to force Holly into his car. In the wake of this event, Holly obtained a restraining order, hoping it would provide her with some measure of safety. But the relief was short-lived. Just 1 week later, both Holly and Bill were found dead under mysterious circumstances. The discovery of their bodies initially led authorities to believe that it was the result of a tragic accident. A passerby had reported finding a car at a construction site in the southwest part of Nashville. The vehicle appeared to have rolled off the road and crashed into a tree. The witness assumed the people inside had been injured in a collision, but when police arrived on the scene, they quickly realized that something far more sinister had occurred. Holly and Bill were both found in the back seat of the car, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. They had been shot, and the interior of the car showed no signs consistent with an accident. What was even more puzzling was the fact that neither Holly nor Bill had any identification or personal belongings on them. Their cell phones, wallets, and other items were missing, leading investigators to suspect that this was not a random event. Upon identifying the victims, detectives were startled to realize that this was the same couple involved in a recent domestic violence case. Initially, they considered the possibility of a murder-suicide, assuming that Bill might have killed Holly before turning the gun on himself. Given their troubled history, this theory seemed plausible at first. However, as the investigation unfolded, the murder-suicide theory began to unravel. For one, no firearm was recovered from the scene. If Bill had indeed killed Holly and then himself, where was the gun? Furthermore, forensic analysis revealed that the nature of the wounds Bill sustained made it impossible for him to have inflicted them on himself. Each gunshot wound was fatal, indicating that someone else had pulled the trigger. The bullets had been fired with precision, suggesting the involvement of someone skilled in handling firearms. As detectives delved deeper into the case, they interviewed Holly's friends and family, learning that she had taken significant steps to protect herself from Bill in the months leading up to her death. She had installed security cameras and reinforced the locks on her doors, hoping to safeguard herself from his increasingly erratic behavior. When the police reviewed footage from the cameras, they discovered unsettling evidence. Bill had been seen lurking around Holly's home on several occasions, wandering the property as if searching for something. His actions confirmed his obsession with her and his inability to move on, but it also raised questions about whether he was truly responsible for the final, deadly encounter. In addition to the footage, witnesses came forward to report seeing Holly and Bill together on the evening of March 11th, just hours before their bodies were found. Strangely, the couple appeared to be having a calm conversation, with no visible signs of hostility between them. This detail threw investigators off course, suggesting that perhaps their relationship had taken a turn toward reconciliation, or at least a temporary truce. Whatever the nature of their interaction that night, it did not seem to suggest that a violent altercation was on the horizon. The absence of a weapon, combined with the forensic evidence, led authorities to explore alternative theories. Could Holly and Bill have been victims of a third party? Their missing belongings pointed to a possible kidnapping scenario. If they had been abducted and forced into the car at gunpoint, it would explain why they were found in such an unnatural position. But who would want them dead, and why? As investigators continued to piece together the events leading up to their deaths, the case grew increasingly complex. Holly and Bill's deaths were no accident, and the initial theories of a simple crime of passion proved insufficient. It became clear that this was a premeditated double murder, carried out by someone who knew what they were doing. The mystery surrounding their deaths became darker and more frightening. One thing became clear as the investigation progressed. Holly Williams and William Bill Lanway had been murdered. Their bodies were stuffed inside the white Acura, and the car was deliberately pushed off the side of the road in an attempt to stage a traffic accident. It was evident that a third person, or perhaps multiple individuals, were involved. Whoever was responsible for the crime seemed to want to make the deaths look like an unfortunate accident. But the staging was sloppy and incomplete, suggesting either haste or incompetence. Despite the amateurish attempt at a cover-up, the perpetrator had taken care to avoid leaving fingerprints or other traceable evidence in the vehicle, adding further complexity to the case. As detectives dug deeper, one of the early theories they explored was that the murders may have been an act of revenge. Bill had a notorious temper and a troubled history, and it wasn't difficult to imagine that he had made enemies over the years. Family members and acquaintances confirmed that Bill's fiery personality had often gotten him into trouble, leading to altercations and strained relationships. The possibility that one of his enemies sought retribution seemed plausible, but it still left the question of Holly's involvement. She was by all accounts a peaceful and kind-hearted person, the complete opposite of Bill in temperament. Why would she be targeted? Perhaps, detectives theorized, she'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, an innocent witness to someone else's vendetta. To explore all angles, investigators examined the victim's recent contacts. They combed through the contents of Holly's and Bill's cell phones, laptops, and social media accounts. During this digital sweep, a curious detail emerged. Both Holly and Bill had communicated with the same mysterious phone number in the days leading up to their deaths. The number, which was untraceable through conventional means, raised immediate red flags. Such anonymous numbers are often used in illicit dealings or by people who wish to conceal their identities. While it was impossible to determine the identity of the person behind the number right away, detectives suspected foul play. They sought assistance from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, whose specialized cybercrime unit could help trace the number through more advanced methods. While the investigation into the phone records continued, detectives turned their attention to the security footage from Holly's home. Holly had installed surveillance cameras as part of her efforts to protect herself from Bill's harassment. However, what the investigators found on the tapes was far more disturbing than they had anticipated. The footage revealed that shortly before Holly's death, 3 masked men had broken into her house. They were dressed entirely in black, and their faces were obscured by masks, making identification difficult. These men appeared methodical and prepared, as though they had studied the layout of the house before entering. Strangely, they took nothing from the home, even though there were valuable items in plain sight. Instead, they seemed focused on searching for something specific, and when they discovered one of the surveillance cameras, they attempted to disable it. Despite their efforts to hide their faces, their casual behavior indicated they were confident in their ability to evade capture. After the intruders left, Holly returned home from work, noticed that her house had been disturbed, and became understandably terrified. She spent the night barricading herself inside her home and had the locks changed the following day. Holly was clearly in fear for her life, but the question remained: who were these men, and why were they targeting her? At first, detectives considered the possibility that Holly was simply caught in the crossfire of Bill's troubled past. But the more they delved into her life, the more they began to question whether there was more to Holly than met the eye. A closer look into Holly's personal and professional life revealed startling information. While she had built a legitimate business with her beauty salon, Shine Aesthetics, this was not her only source of income. Holly had a hidden side to her life, one that not even her closest friends knew in full detail. Since the age of 18, she had been working part-time as an escort under the pseudonym Leah Love. Her clientele was exclusive, consisting of wealthy and powerful men who could afford her services. Holly's escort work, which included accompanying clients to events, performing massages, and other more intimate services, had provided her with a substantial income over the years. The beauty salon, as it turned out, was more of a passion project and a convenient cover for her true line of work. This revelation cast Holly's life in a different light. Her success in the escort business had allowed her to live comfortably, but it also brought with it a host of risks. Working in such a high-stakes, secretive world meant that Holly had likely crossed paths with dangerous individuals. Envy, jealousy, and obsession were all common in her line of work, and it wasn't hard to imagine that she had made some enemies along the way. Although Holly did not openly advertise her secondary profession, Bill knew about it. In fact, she had been upfront with Bill about her work when they first started dating, and though he struggled with jealousy, he initially accepted her decision to continue her escort work. However, her high-profile clients and the secrecy surrounding her profession likely drew attention from the wrong kind of people. Detectives now had to consider whether the three masked intruders were somehow connected to Holly's escort business. Had one of her wealthy clients become possessive or vengeful? Or had someone from Bill's tumultuous past learned about her hidden life and sought to exploit it? The break-in at her home appeared less like a random burglary and more like a calculated attempt to intimidate or harm her. The men had not stolen anything, which suggested that they were looking for information or leverage. Perhaps they were trying to send Holly a message, or worse, they were planning her murder all along. Adding to the complexity of the case was the realization that Holly's involvement in the escort business could have exposed her to a dangerous web of people. Men with power, money, and influence who would go to great lengths to protect their secrets. These were men who had much to lose if their association with Holly came to light. The investigation had to consider whether someone in her exclusive clientele had orchestrated the murders to silence her permanently. After all, Holly had gained a reputation for being exceptionally beautiful and charming, attracting men who were willing to pay handsomely for her company. But in doing so, she may have attracted the kind of obsession that turns deadly. At the same time, the investigation could not overlook Bill's role in this tragic story. While he may not have been directly involved in the escort world, his volatile nature and his relationship with Holly made him a potential target as well. His possessiveness over Holly, combined with his already troubled past, made him a liability to anyone who felt threatened by Holly's connections or who wanted revenge for personal reasons. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but many questions still remained unanswered. Why were Holly and Bill both murdered? Was it a crime of passion, a botched kidnapping, or something more sinister tied to Holly's secret life? As the FBI continued their work on tracing the anonymous phone number, and as detectives pursued leads from Holly's escort clientele, it became clear that this case was not just about two people in a toxic relationship. It was about power, wealth, and the dangerous allure of secrets. The CCTV footage of the masked men who had broken into Holly's home was eventually released to the public in hopes of identifying the perpetrators. However, The poor quality of the images made it difficult to draw any useful conclusions, and the public release did not yield any leads. But a significant breakthrough in the case came when the investigators were finally able to identify the anonymous number that both Holly and Bill had been in contact with. The number belonged to a 30-year-old man named Adam K.Y., a resident of North Carolina. Adam turned out to be a former military operative with specialized training in weaponry and combat tactics. He had transitioned from military service to working for a private security firm, but in reality, he operated more like a mercenary, a man for hire with a lethal skill set. What made Adam even more dangerous was his criminal background. A search into his history revealed that he had served a 4-month sentence for impersonating a police officer, a crime that should have raised more alarms than it did. During a search of his apartment, investigators found an arsenal of illegal weapons, including silencers, telescopic sights, components for explosives, and even flashbang grenades. Yet despite being in possession of such dangerous materials, Adam had somehow managed to avoid a lengthy prison sentence, suggesting he had connections or protection in high places. It was clear that Adam was a dangerous man, and the fact that his face matched the man seen in Holly's CCTV footage made him a prime suspect. With this revelation, the investigation took a sharp turn. The detectives worked hard to uncover the connection between Holly, Bill, and Adam. Given Adam's history and his skill set, it was unlikely that his involvement was a coincidence. He specialized in serious assignments, often working as a bodyguard for high-profile individuals or carrying out operations that required stealth and precision. After Adam was brought in for questioning, the detectives were met with resistance. He was tight-lipped, offering little information that could help move the case forward. After multiple interrogations, Adam was detained, giving the investigators time to gather more evidence. While Adam remained in custody, the detectives turned their attention to another key figure who had emerged during the investigation, a man named Eric Charles Mond. Eric Mond was a successful businessman from Austin, Texas, where he owned the Mond Toyota dealership, a well-known car dealership in the area. To the outside world, Eric was the epitome of a family man, devoted to his wife and children, and a pillar of the local community. But as the detectives soon discovered, Eric had his own set of secrets. Like many men in his position, he had a weakness for extramarital affairs. One of those affairs had been with Holly Williams. Eric Mond frequently traveled to Nashville under the pretense of visiting his son, who was attending college in the area. However, during these visits, he would indulge in his secret desires, which included seeing Holly. Eric had first met Holly through her escort services, and the two had struck up a regular arrangement. Holly's beauty and charm had captivated him, and they saw each other whenever he was in town. The affair, however, was conducted under the radar, with Eric using an alias and keeping their communications discreet. On February 3, 2020, Eric, using a fake name, reached out to Holly via email. He informed her that he would soon be in town and expressed his desire to see her. Over the next few days, he continued to send messages, eagerly anticipating their meeting. In one message, he wrote, "Good morning, beautiful. I'm looking forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you at the bar like last time. Text me when you get there." From all appearances, the date had gone off without a hitch, but the affair would soon take a dark turn. By March 1, 2020, Eric received a series of anonymous threatening messages. The unknown sender claimed to have knowledge of his affair with Holly and demanded $25,000 to keep quiet. If Eric didn't comply, the blackmailer threatened to expose his infidelity to his wife, destroying his reputation and family. For a man of Eric's standing, such a scandal would be devastating. However, what Eric didn't realize at the time was that the blackmail wasn't coming from Holly or some random individual. There was a far more sophisticated operation behind it. Faced with the potential ruin of his personal and professional life, Eric Mond turned to an old acquaintance for help, a man named Gilad Peled. Gilad, aged 47, was a former associate who had been consulting for Eric's dealership, helping to resolve issues related to homeless people occupying the parking lots of his business. But more importantly, Gilad was the owner of a private security firm, a company that had taken on various protection contracts, though it had been struggling due to the ease with which Texans could arm and protect themselves. Despite his firm's dwindling business, Gilad was eager to take on a lucrative new client like Eric Mond, especially since his firm employed someone with the specialized skills to deal with the situation, none other than Adam KY. Gilad had started his security business after returning to Texas from Israel, where he had lived for a time. His background and training made him ideal for handling delicate and dangerous situations, and Eric's predicament presented an opportunity to prove his company's worth. Eric explained the blackmail situation to Gilad, and the two men quickly devised a plan. Instead of paying the ransom, they would eliminate the problem entirely. Eric's reputation and family life were at stake, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect them. The fact that Adam, a trained mercenary, was on Gilad's payroll made it clear that this would not be a simple intimidation job. The solution would be final. The more the detectives uncovered, the clearer the motive behind Holly and Bill's deaths became. Holly's involvement with Eric, coupled with the blackmail threats, had turned her from a casual fling into a dangerous liability. Eric Mond, desperate to keep his affair a secret, had inadvertently set into motion a chain of events that would lead to murder. Bill, who had been involved with Holly but was not part of the blackmail, likely became collateral damage in the plot to silence her. His proximity to Holly and his presence on the day of the murder sealed his fate. As the investigation continued, it became apparent that the murders had been premeditated and carried out with chilling efficiency. Adam KY's role as the hired gun, Gilad's coordination, and Eric Mond's motive created a perfect storm of circumstances that led to the tragic deaths of Holly Williams and Bill Lanway. The plot, which had initially seemed like a simple crime of passion or revenge, was now revealed to be a meticulously planned execution designed to protect the reputation of a powerful businessman. A few weeks after the brutal murders of Holly Williams and Bill Lanway, a seemingly benign detail emerged that would later prove to be a critical piece of evidence in the investigation. Eric Charles Mond, the wealthy Austin businessman entangled in the affair, left a positive review on a website dedicated to private security companies. On the surface, the comment appeared innocuous. Eric praised the efficiency and professionalism of Gilad Ped's security staff, stating how pleased he was with their services. But to the detectives already on his trail, this was the break they had been waiting for. The review demonstrated a direct connection between Eric, the suspect Adam KY, and the slain couple. Now, the final piece of the puzzle was getting Adam to confess and unravel the web of deceit. Adam had been resisting interrogation, but the detectives warned him that silence would only make things worse. They pressed him, emphasizing that the case was already closing in on all involved. Gradually, Adam began to crack. He revealed that Eric Mond had indeed sought help from Gilad Ped after receiving threatening messages. Eric, feeling the pressure of potential blackmail, complained of harassment and extortion. At the time, he suspected Holly might be involved, and so he asked Gilad to investigate the matter discreetly. Gilad, in turn, brought Adam into the fold, alongside another ex-military associate, Brian Brockway. Brockway, like Adam, had a background in combat and special operations, making them the perfect duo for such a sensitive and dangerous assignment. Initially, the task was simple. Find the person behind the threatening messages and intimidate them into silence. Adam and Brian began their surveillance of Holly and Bill. Adam reported their findings back to Gilad, filing progress reports that read more like military debriefings than the typical notes of private investigators. The investigation quickly revealed that Bill Lanway, Holly's ex-boyfriend, was behind the blackmail. Bill had discovered Holly's affair with Eric Mond and saw an opportunity to both get revenge on his ex and make a quick fortune. Under an alias, he had been texting Eric, threatening to expose his affair unless he was paid $25,000. When Bill's involvement became clear, the mission took a darker turn. Gilad Ped's orders shifted from merely intimidating Bill to eliminating him, as well as Holly, who could become a liability. Eric Mond, panicked and terrified of losing everything, agreed to this escalation. Bill had continued to harass Eric, and the final straw came on March 11th when Eric received a phone call at his house. If his wife had answered, the caller would have exposed the affair, destroying Eric's reputation and family. In that moment of fear, Eric agreed to Gilad's proposal to deal with Bill and Holly, offering a staggering $750,000 for the job. The plan was set into motion. On March 12, 2020, Holly and Bill were seen leaving her house together. They got into a car and headed off, unaware that they were being followed by Adam and Brian. The couple's fate was sealed when they were intercepted by the armed mercenaries. Adam and Brian kidnapped Holly and Bill, taking them to a remote construction site on Old Hickory Boulevard. There, they shot both victims and left their bodies in the backseat of their car, which they then pushed down an embankment to make it look like a tragic accident. With the killings complete, the mercenaries meticulously worked to remove any trace of their involvement. They returned the rental car they had used for the mission, destroyed incriminating evidence, and then scattered to different locations. After Adam, Brian, and Gilad were all arrested, the detectives decided to play one final card. They wanted to catch Eric Mond red-handed, and the best way to do that was to use his paranoia against him. One of the mercenaries, acting on the detectives' orders, contacted Eric and fabricated a story. Gilad, posing as if he were still a free man, called Eric and claimed that one of their partners had found out about the murders and was now demanding a cut of the payout. Gilad suggested they handle this new threat the same way they had dealt with Bill and Holly, by eliminating him. Despite his growing desperation, Eric Mond, furious at the thought of another person knowing his secret, agreed to commit another murder. His willingness to continue the violence was shocking, but it confirmed what the detectives already suspected. Eric would stop at nothing to protect his reputation and keep his secrets buried. On December 10, 2021, the arrest of prominent businessman Eric Charles Mond sent shockwaves through Austin's elite. Eric, along with his co-conspirators, Adam Carey, Brian Brockway, and Gilad Ped, was charged with contract murder. Of the four accused, only Eric expressed any remorse for the crime, while the mercenaries, Adam and Brian, remained cold and unrepentant. Before their arrests, detectives had bugged the conversations of Gilad and Brian. The recordings revealed a disturbing lack of conscience as the two men joked about the murders, remarking that the couple got off easy, displaying chilling indifference to the lives they had taken. As the full story emerged, it became clear that Holly and Bill had been caught in a deadly game orchestrated by powerful men who cared little for the collateral damage they caused. Their lives were taken to preserve the reputation of a man who thought he could buy his way out of any problem, but no amount of money could erase the evidence of his crimes, nor could it silence the truth. During his interrogation, Eric initially attempted to deflect blame onto his hired killers, claiming that his intentions were misunderstood. He insisted that he had only wanted to frighten Bill Lanway, the blackmailer, rather than orchestrate his murder. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Detectives presented transaction records, phone communications, and the surveillance reports connecting him directly to the criminal plot. Confronted with this irrefutable proof, Eric ultimately confessed to his role in the conspiracy, admitting that he had indeed hired the mercenaries to eliminate Bill and Holly. The murder-for-hire scheme was no longer just speculation. It was confirmed, and Eric's world unraveled. The court hearings began in November 2023 and lasted 2 weeks, during which the full extent of the conspiracy was laid bare. It was established that the deadly plot was set in motion in early March 2020. Financial records showed that Eric had made significant payments to Gilad Ped, the head of the private security firm. On March 5, Eric transferred $155,000 as an advance payment to Gilad, who then coordinated the operation. Gilad, being in charge of his employees' payments, distributed the funds between Adam and Brian. On March 9th, the surveillance of Holly and Bill began, with the ultimate plan being their elimination. By March 12th, the deed was done, and Eric completed the final payment of $150,000, making the total payout for the murders a staggering $750,000 by the end of the month. The court presented these financial transactions, along with other key pieces of evidence, to paint a clear picture of premeditated, cold-blooded murder. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before reaching a unanimous verdict. On November 17, 2023, Brian Brockway and Adam Carey were found guilty of contract murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and kidnapping resulting in death. Gilad Ped, who had already entered into a plea deal against his co-defendants in exchange for leniency, was also convicted on similar charges. His cooperation did little to spare him from a life sentence, as his role in organizing the crime was undeniable. Eric Maughan's trial concluded on November 30th. While he was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, the jury acquitted him of the charge of kidnapping resulting in death. Nonetheless, his involvement in orchestrating the brutal killings of Holly and Bill earned him a life sentence without the possibility of parole. A tale of deception and horror gripped a community with its tragic twists. The night began with the promise of a seemingly ordinary evening, but quickly descended into unimaginable horror. Two people, once wrapped in the warmth of budding romance, were about to experience irreversible changes in their lives. A security camera captured them arriving together, smiling and chatting, seemingly unaware of the terrible tragedy about to unfold. When the police finally entered the apartment, they were greeted by a horrific, chilling scene. The smell of death lingered beneath the sterile cold of an overloaded air conditioner, and there, on the floor, lay her lifeless body, hidden by a sheet. Blood soaked the carpet, smeared across the walls and floor, telling a horrific story of a brutal, frenzied attack. Born Kimberly Karen Mota de Oliveira on February 26, 1998, in the picturesque Brazilian town of Manacapuru, she was the eldest child and only daughter of Nyla and Jose Ola. Kimberly's background was as diverse as it was beautiful, with Brazilian, Spanish, and indigenous ancestry blending together to give her striking features. One could say she had won the genetic lottery. Her flawless skin, thick flowing hair, radiant smile, and graceful feminine figure made her stand out in any crowd. From a young age, she was surrounded by admiration, and it seemed as though everyone, from her peers to adults, couldn't help but compare her to an angel. But Kimberly wasn't just beautiful. She was also an ambitious and talented young woman. She practiced dance, excelled in gymnastics, and loved swimming. Alongside these physical pursuits, she was a dedicated student, passionate about learning. Kimberly read widely, attended the theater regularly, and even pursued foreign languages, showing an early curiosity about the world beyond her small town. It became clear from a young age that Kimberly was destined for something more, and her early involvement in beauty contests only seemed to confirm this. She began winning local titles, modeling in clothing catalogs, and soon landed features in advertisements. Her striking looks and graceful poise in front of the camera made her a natural fit for the world of modeling. By high school, Kimberly had made a decision. She would pursue a career in modeling. This wasn't entirely surprising, given that her mother, Nyla, had also been a local beauty queen in her youth, winning the prestigious Miss Manacapuru title. However, Nyla eventually set aside her modeling ambitions to focus on raising her children. For Kimberly, this legacy was both an inspiration and a challenge. She had inherited not only her mother's beauty, but also her drive, and she was determined to take her ambitions even further. As Kimberly grew older, her star continued to rise. She participated in fashion shows, graced the covers of local magazines, and earned the title of the most beautiful girl in her hometown. By 2017, she reached the finals of the Miss Amazonas competition and was poised to try again, with her sights set firmly on the Miss Brazil title. It wasn't hard to imagine her representing Brazil on the global stage, competing in renowned pageants like Miss World or Miss Universe. However, Kimberly understood that beauty alone was not enough to achieve her lofty goals. She was acutely aware that high-level competitions evaluated not just physical appearance, but also intelligence, education, moral character, and community involvement. Beauty queens were expected to be role models, with spotless reputations and lives free from scandal. Kimberly worked hard to embody these ideals, striving to present herself as the perfect candidate in every way. The pressure to maintain perfection, the scrutiny of the public eye, and the hidden dangers of obsession all paint a grim picture of the realities faced by those in the spotlight. In Kimberly's case, the attention she received was not just adoration, but a dangerous obsession that ultimately contributed to a tragic outcome. Unfortunately, beauty can be both a blessing and a burden. Kimberly was highly active on social media, where she shared more than just her captivating looks. She used her platform to promote a healthy lifestyle, often posting about sports, fitness, and proper nutrition. Her online presence was not merely an exhibition of beauty, but a genuine attempt to inspire others, particularly young women, to take better care of themselves. Through motivational posts, she emphasized the importance of self-care, discipline, and perseverance, encouraging her growing base of followers to embrace a healthier and more confident version of themselves. By 2019, Kimberly had amassed tens of thousands of followers on her social media accounts, a testament to her influence. She didn't just want to be another model, she aspired to be a role model, a figure others could look up to. In addition to her health-focused posts, Kimberly allowed her followers a glimpse into her personal life, sharing behind-the-scenes moments from her photo shoots and candid interactions with friends and family. Her approachable and engaging personality made her more relatable to her fans. This authenticity, combined with her natural beauty, only boosted her popularity. Kimberly would regularly engage with her followers, answering questions, sharing advice, and keeping the tone of her page lighthearted yet informative. She was determined to use her platform responsibly, knowing that many young women looked up to her for guidance and inspiration. At just 19, Kimberly's ambitions stretched beyond modeling. She made the life-changing decision to pursue higher education, with dreams of becoming a dentist. Determined to balance her passions with academics, she enrolled in medical school and moved to Manaus, the bustling capital of Amazonas. The city, a vibrant contrast to her small, serene hometown, was not only the largest in the region but also home to her maternal uncle, Henry, with whom she decided to live. Passing her entrance exams and securing her spot at the university, Kimberly seemed to have the world at her feet. The transition to Manaus, though drastic, didn't faze her. She quickly adapted to the fast pace of city life, made new friends, and continued to balance her studies with her love for fitness and modeling. With everything falling into place, her future seemed bright and full of potential. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, danger was slowly creeping in, an unexpected and menacing force that Kimberly could not have anticipated. In the fall of 2019, Kimberly went out for a night of fun with a close friend at a popular club in Manaus. Amid the pulsating music and lively crowd, a man approached her, introducing himself as Rafael Fernandez Rodriguez. He was handsome, well-dressed, and seemed harmless enough. Offering to buy Kimberly a drink, Rafael attempted to strike up a conversation. However, Kimberly, being well-versed in handling the attention her beauty often attracted, politely declined, explaining that she was with her friend and didn't need anything. Rafael, appearing unfazed, apologized and walked away. Yet what seemed like a chance encounter was anything but. It was a calculated move on Rafael's part. Unbeknownst to Kimberly, Rafael had been following her social media for nearly a year, silently observing her life from a distance. The 31-year-old corporate lawyer, recently divorced, had become obsessed with the idea of being with her. He meticulously studied her posts, learning about her interests, her routines, and her move to Manaus. Determined to pursue her, Rafael relocated to the city as well, securing a high-paying job and renting an upscale apartment in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. His brief encounter with Kimberly at the club wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of months of planning. After their failed interaction at the nightclub, Rafael escalated his efforts. He began bombarding Kimberly with messages on social media, complimenting her, inviting her out, and flooding her posts with likes and comments. However, Kimberly, accustomed to the attention of numerous admirers, dismissed him as just another overly eager fan. Rafael's messages went unanswered, but his determination only grew. Changing tactics, he began to infiltrate her social circle. He befriended her classmates, some of her friends, and even a few of her relatives by adding them on social media. Slowly, he ingratiated himself with the people closest to her, hoping this network of connections would bring him closer to his goal. Eventually, Raphael's persistence paid off when one of Kimberly's acquaintances, unknowingly, provided him with her phone number. Armed with this new level of access, Raphael intensified his obsession, messaging Kimberly directly and pushing for in-person meetings. He learned even more about her life, where she spent her free time, the kind of music she liked, and her daily routines. He even attended some of the outdoor fitness sessions Kimberly led, blending into the crowd and waiting for an opportunity to get closer. During one of these sessions, Raphael finally caught Kimberly's attention, though not in the way he had hoped. His presence felt unsettling, his persistence more disturbing than flattering. Raphael's obsession was growing darker and more calculated by the day. What started as admiration had now morphed into a perilous fixation, and Kimberly was at the center of it all, unaware of the storm brewing around her. After weeks of exchanging messages and calls, Kimberly and Raphael finally met in person, marking what appeared to be the beginning of a natural, blossoming romance. Raphael had been careful, strategic, and patient in his pursuit of her, using his charm and attentiveness to gradually win her over. Despite the nearly 10-year age gap between them, they developed a comfortable friendship. Raphael was thoughtful, always ensuring Kimberly knew he was thinking about her without overwhelming her with affection. His calculated approach worked like a charm. By March 2020, they publicly declared their relationship, and Kimberly felt optimistic about what seemed like a promising partnership. However, it didn't take long for Raphael's true colors to emerge. The charming man she had grown fond of began to reveal a darker, controlling side. What had initially seemed like genuine care and attention quickly morphed into something suffocating. Raphael's interest in Kimberly turned into an obsession, with him demanding to know every detail of her daily life. At first, Kimberly found his jealousy mildly amusing, thinking it was simply his way of showing how much he cared. She had never experienced this level of possessiveness before and, being fiercely independent, she brushed it off as harmless at first. But Raphael's behavior escalated rapidly. His constant need to monitor her whereabouts became intrusive and oppressive. He wanted to control what she did, who she was with, and even how she interacted with people online. He scrutinized her social media activity, dictating what photos she could post, which comments she was allowed to reply to, and even when she could go live on her platforms. Kimberly's independence was being chipped away, and what once felt like a playful relationship began to suffocate her. As Raphael's obsession grew, so did his demands. Soon, Kimberly found herself in a toxic situation where she couldn't make even the smallest decision without his input or approval. Whenever she tried to assert her autonomy and set boundaries, Raphael would brush them aside, insisting that he only acted out of love. The situation worsened with each passing week. Arguments erupted frequently, and Kimberly, who had never been in such a controlling relationship, was overwhelmed. Yet after every fight, Raphael would apologize profusely, pulling out all the stops to win her back. He would take her to expensive restaurants, surprise her with extravagant gifts, and cover her with attention, convincing her that his overbearing actions came from a place of deep love. But behind the romantic gestures, his controlling behavior grew more sinister. Kimberly confided in her closest friends, admitting how suffocating the relationship had become. She shared how Raphael wouldn't allow her to talk to male classmates at university, how he'd take her phone without permission to inspect her calls and messages, and how every disagreement ended in an explosive argument. As these confrontations became more heated, Kimberly began to fear Raphael's unpredictability. She was starting to feel trapped. Kimberly's friends became concerned for her well-being. They encouraged her to confront Raphael, or better yet, leave him before the situation escalated into something even more dangerous. Kimberly, too, realized that her once bright and promising future was being clouded by the oppressive weight of this toxic relationship. She had dreams, big dreams, a thriving modeling career, international travel, photo shoots with world-renowned photographers, and the completion of her university studies. None of these ambitions fit into the narrow, controlled life Raphael wanted for her. She could see the stark contrast between her desires and the future Raphael envisioned, and she knew she couldn't sacrifice her ambitions for the sake of a relationship that had turned into a power struggle. By May 2020, after enduring 2 draining months of Raphael's increasingly controlling behavior, Kimberly made the difficult decision to end the relationship. But knowing Raphael's volatile nature, she hesitated. She feared that a breakup would provoke an extreme reaction. She bided her time, waiting for the right moment, but the situation had become unbearable, and she could no longer delay the inevitable. On May 10, which happened to be Mother's Day in Brazil, Kimberly found herself at an emotional crossroads. The COVID-19 pandemic had made it impossible for her to travel back to her hometown and spend the day with her mother, Neela, who was battling cancer and undergoing treatment in the hospital. Kimberly posted a touching photo of the two of them on social media, accompanied by a heartfelt caption expressing her love and gratitude for her mother. It was a bittersweet day for her. While she longed to be with her family, she was also mentally preparing herself to confront Raphael and end their relationship that very night. Later that day, Kimberly went for a run in a nearby park with a small group of friends, including Raphael. To the casual observer, everything appeared normal. She and Raphael seemed to be getting along well, and there was no outward sign of tension between them. But only her closest friend knew the truth. Kimberly had already made up her mind to break up with Raphael later that evening. She had finally reached the breaking point, realizing that her relationship with him was not only toxic but potentially dangerous. She could no longer ignore the warning signs or delay the inevitable conversation. She was ready to reclaim her independence and her future, even if it meant facing Raphael's wrath. That night would mark a tragic turning point in Kimberly's life, one that no one could have predicted. What should have been a moment of liberation became the catalyst for something far darker and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. At noon on May 10th, Kimberly called her uncle, Henry, to inform him that she would be spending the day with her best friend, Gabriella. She sounded upbeat, casually reassuring him that she would be home later that night to sleep. Kimberly mentioned that she had forgotten her keys and asked Henry to leave the front door unlocked. Trusting his niece, Henry agreed without a second thought. He left the door unlocked and went to bed, fully expecting Kimberly to return by midnight, as she had promised. Kimberly had always been reliable, and there was no reason to doubt that she would keep her word. Meanwhile, at Gabriella's house, Kimberly was rehearsing how she would break the news to Raphael that she wanted to end their relationship. She spent hours carefully considering her words, determined to handle the conversation delicately to avoid angering him. Raphael had become increasingly unpredictable, and Kimberly was well aware that this conversation would not be easy. Still, she felt it was time to free herself from the toxic relationship. By 9 p.m., Raphael arrived at Gabriella's house in his new white Audi, as sleek and pristine as the image he tried to project. Kimberly, ever polite, smiled as she said goodbye to her friend. She climbed into the passenger seat, waving as the car pulled away into the night. That wave was the last time anyone saw Kimberly alive. Her fate was sealed the moment she stepped into that car, although no one knew it yet. The next morning, on May 11th, Henry woke up with a strange sense of unease. The first thing he noticed was that Kimberly hadn't come home. She was always good about letting him know if her plans changed, and she would never stay out without informing him, especially not overnight. He checked his phone, hoping for a message from her, but there was nothing. His concern growing by the minute, Henry tried calling Kimberly's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He then reached out to Gabriella, who informed him that Kimberly had left with Raphael the night before and hadn't been heard from since. Panic began to set in. Something was wrong, and Henry knew it. Kimberly had never gone off the grid like this. In desperation, Henry tried to contact Raphael, but his calls went unanswered. More alarmingly, Kimberly missed her classes at the university that day, a serious cause for concern, since she had never missed a class without a valid excuse. By this point, Henry was certain that something terrible had happened. He rushed to the police to file a missing person report, fearing the worst. However, the authorities were frustratingly dismissive. They assured him that Kimberly and Raphael were both adults and probably just took off somewhere without telling anyone. They urged him not to worry, but Henry's gut told him otherwise. He knew his niece, and she would never simply vanish like this. Refusing to give up, Henry organized a small group of Kimberly's close friends and launched their own search. They started by heading to Raphael's apartment, but there was no response when they knocked on the door. His car was also absent from the parking lot. It seemed like the couple had disappeared without a trace. Kimberly wouldn't have left without informing someone. As the hours dragged on with no sign of her, Henry had no choice but to contact his sister, Neela, Kimberly's mother. He had tried to shield Nyla from the news, knowing how fragile her health was. Nyla was undergoing cancer treatment, and Henry didn't want to add to her stress. But now, with Kimberly missing for nearly 24 hours, it was unavoidable. Nyla had already sensed something was wrong, especially after her own attempts to contact Kimberly throughout the day had gone unanswered. Henry tried to comfort her, reminding her that Kimberly was responsible and stayed away from trouble, but neither of them could shake the growing fear that something horrible had happened. As the news of Kimberly's disappearance spread, her friends and followers on social media mobilized. They flooded their accounts with her photos, descriptions, and heartfelt pleas for information. Kimberly was a well-known figure, and her sudden disappearance quickly gained viral attention. Thousands of people across social media joined the search, sharing posts and hoping for any clue that might lead to her whereabouts. Despite the massive outpouring of support, no concrete leads emerged. Finally, on May 12th, 2 days after Kimberly and Raphael vanished, the police began to take the case seriously. The mounting pressure from both the family and the public forced them to act. With a search warrant in hand, officers arrived at Raphael's apartment, hoping to find some answers. What they discovered inside was beyond anything they had expected. Upon forcing their way into the apartment, the police were met with a grisly scene. In the bedroom, they found Kimberly's lifeless body. She was lying on the floor, partially covered by a sheet and surrounded by a pool of blood. The bed was stained with blood, and there were clear signs of a violent struggle. Blood was smeared across the carpets and floors, painting a horrific picture of what had occurred. It was evident that a brutal attack had taken place, and the perpetrator had panicked afterward. There were half-hearted attempts to clean up the blood, but it was clear that the person responsible had been in a rush. To buy themselves more time, the killer had cranked the air conditioning to its lowest setting, hoping to slow the decomposition of Kimberly's body before anyone discovered her. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Kimberly's friends, family, and countless social media followers were devastated by the tragic and senseless loss of her young life. The once vibrant, ambitious young woman was now gone, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Questions swirled as everyone tried to piece together what had really happened that night. Raphael was nowhere to be found, his sudden disappearance only adding to the mystery. As the investigation unfolded, the media picked up the story, and Kimberly's tragic end became a national headline. Her death was a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind even the most charming facades. The outpouring of grief and support from the public was immense, but it was little comfort to those who had known and loved Kimberly. They wondered why her life had been so cruelly cut short, and whether Raphael, the man she had once trusted, was responsible for this terrible crime. The forensic examination of the crime scene uncovered chilling and horrifying details. Kimberly had been stabbed 4 times, 2 savage thrusts to her chest and 2 to her neck. The murder weapon, a large kitchen knife, was found discarded carelessly in the adjacent room, still covered in blood and clearly bearing the fingerprints of her killer. There was no attempt to conceal or destroy the evidence, as if the perpetrator had acted in a blind panic, tossing the knife aside as soon as the brutal act was done. Even more frightening was that there were defensive wounds on Kimberly's body. Experts deduced that the initial assault had begun on the bed, but the fatal blow, one that severed her carotid artery, had been delivered while she was already on the floor. The room bore signs of a violent struggle, but it was the kind of sudden attack that left little chance for survival. The scene told a story of unimaginable terror, one that Kimberly never had a chance to escape. Raphael, her boyfriend, was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings, including important documents, bank cards, and his car keys, were missing, indicating that he had fled the scene almost immediately after the murder. What had initially been considered a case of a missing couple had now turned into a manhunt for a fugitive. All eyes were now on Raphael, who had become the prime suspect in what was clearly a premeditated and cold-blooded killing. The question that haunted everyone, from Kimberly's devastated family to the investigators, was where Raphael had gone. Was he still in the country? Or had he already managed to slip across a border, vanishing into thin air? The forensic evidence left no doubt that Raphael was responsible for Kimberly's murder. His fingerprints on the knife, the absence of any other suspects at the crime scene, and his sudden disappearance all pointed squarely at him. Law enforcement agencies across the country were put on high alert. Social media played a crucial role, with warnings and updates flooding platforms, urging citizens to report any sightings of Raphael or his distinctive white Audi. It was a race against time. Every second counted in the search for the man who had committed such a heinous crime. The investigators knew that Raphael was dangerous and likely desperate, and they treated every report and tip from the public with urgency. The break in the case came on May 13th, just 2 days after Kimberly's body had been discovered. A white Audi matching the description of Raphael's car was found wrecked in a ditch along a rural road in the neighboring state of Pará. Traffic camera footage later revealed that Raphael had been driving recklessly, fleeing the city at dangerous speeds before losing control of the vehicle. The car had flipped over and skidded off the road, landing in the ditch. However, when authorities arrived at the crash site, Raphael was nowhere to be found. There was blood in the car, indicating that he had been injured, but the fugitive had vanished into the surrounding countryside. It was unclear whether he was severely hurt or had managed to limp away, but one thing was certain. Raphael was still on the run. As more information trickled in, it became apparent that Raphael had not gotten far. After the crash, he had been picked up by a passing motorist who, unaware of the situation, had driven him to a nearby town. There, Raphael hired a taxi to take him to the nearest bank, where he withdrew almost all of the money from his account. He then used the same taxi to drive him to Boa Vista, a border town close to Venezuela. His plan was clear. He intended to cross the border on foot, evading capture and disappearing into another country. However, his escape attempt was thwarted by an unforeseen obstacle: the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to strict border controls in place because of the virus, Raphael was turned away when he tried to slip into Venezuela. His plan, which had seemed foolproof, had failed. Desperate and with limited options, Raphael didn't return to Boa Vista to blend into the bustling town, which had a population of nearly 300,000 people. Instead, he made a fateful decision to hide in the dense, forested areas surrounding the town. He found refuge in a small, camouflaged hut deep in the jungle, far from the eyes of the authorities. For several days, he remained there, hoping that the police would give up their search, allowing him time to plan his next move. But the law enforcement officers weren't about to give up. The authorities, working tirelessly, eventually tracked Raphael to his hideout. After days of combing through the dense forest, they stumbled upon the camouflaged hut where Raphael was taking shelter. But the arrest wasn't as straightforward as they had hoped. As the officers approached the hut, they were suddenly ambushed by a group of men wielding machetes. It turned out that Raphael had paid local residents to act as his bodyguards, using the money he had withdrawn from the bank. These men, unaware of the full extent of Raphael's crimes, had been swayed by his generosity and agreed to protect him. The situation could have turned deadly, but the police, experienced in dealing with tense confrontations, quickly diffused the situation. They calmly explained to the locals that they were harboring a wanted criminal and that the consequences for aiding him would be severe. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the men backed down, leaving Raphael to face the law on his own. In a dramatic final act, Raphael was taken into custody without further violence. The capture brought an end to a tense manhunt, but for Kimberly's family and friends, the nightmare was far from over. As Raphael was escorted away in handcuffs, the weight of what he had done hung heavy in the air. Raphael's version of the events when he was finally arrested painted a twisted and bizarre picture of the tragic night. The evidence stacked against him was overwhelming, leaving him with little to no room for denial. Surveillance footage captured Kimberly entering his car, arriving at his apartment, and showed Raphael leaving the building alone hours later. What puzzled investigators most was how calm both appeared on the footage, smiling, chatting, and showing no visible signs of tension. When Raphael left the building, he maintained the same eerie composure, giving no indication of remorse or distress, as if he had nothing to hide. With undeniable proof in front of him, Raphael eventually confessed, but the version of the story he offered was shocking and unsettling. According to Raphael's account, what was supposed to be a romantic evening took a dark and unexpected turn. He claimed that after they had spent intimate moments together, Kimberly had gone to take a shower. While she was in the bathroom, Raphael allegedly decided to check her phone out of suspicion and discovered conversations between Kimberly and several men on social media. Overcome with jealousy, instead of immediately arguing with her, he took out a large kitchen knife and hid it under his pillow. He told police that he had no intention of harming her, but only wanted to scare her if she lied to him about talking to other men. When Kimberly emerged from the shower and lay down on the bed, Raphael began questioning her about the men she had been chatting with. He said that Kimberly smiled and denied talking to anyone, which he took as confirmation of her deceit. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Raphael claimed he stabbed her twice in the chest. Kimberly, completely unprepared for the attack, fell from the bed to the floor, where Raphael delivered 2 more brutal blows to her neck, severing her carotid artery. According to him, as soon as the act was done, he was consumed with regret, but saw no way to undo the horror he had unleashed. He attempted to clean the scene, but realized it was hopeless. With no way of moving her body without drawing suspicion, he covered Kimberly with a sheet and turned the air conditioner on high to slow decomposition before fleeing the scene, hoping to buy himself some time. However, this version of events was challenged by multiple witness testimonies. Kimberly's best friend, Gabriella, painted a completely different picture of what had happened. She testified that Kimberly had spent weeks preparing to break up with Raphael, whose increasing volatility and emotional instability had become unbearable. According to Gabriella, Kimberly had rehearsed the conversation over and over again, carefully planning how to navigate Raphael's dangerous temper without provoking him. Gabriella insisted there was no chance Kimberly had been intimate with Raphael that night, as her decision to end their relationship was final. She further added that Kimberly would never have made light of any conversation with other men, knowing full well how unpredictable Raphael's anger could be. Adding to the weight of this testimony was Raphael's ex-wife, who recounted chilling details of her own experiences with him. She described him as a cruel and controlling man who had exhibited violent tendencies throughout their marriage. She said that his fits of rage were a constant presence in their home, which had led to the dissolution of their marriage. Her testimony painted Raphael as a man who had long been a danger to those around him, lending credibility to the belief that Kimberly's murder was not a result of sudden rage, but part of a pattern of violent behavior. The only person who continued to defend Raphael was his mother, Fatima. She refused to believe that her son could be responsible for such a heinous act, insisting that he was a good man who had been driven to violence by the women in his life. Fatima blamed Kimberly, Raphael's ex-wife, and anyone else who had ever crossed paths with her son, claiming they had all pushed him to sin. She clung to the belief that Raphael had simply been pushed too far and was incapable of such cruelty on his own. The trial, which should have brought justice to Kimberly's grieving family, instead dealt a devastating blow. The weight of their grief was compounded on the very day the sentence was handed down. Kimberly's mother, Nyla, who had been battling cancer, passed away just hours after hearing the verdict. Despite her illness, Nyla had attended every day of the trial through video call from her hospital bed. But the stress, grief, and anguish of losing her daughter, combined with the trial's unsatisfactory conclusion, proved too much for her already weakened body. Raphael's defense team employed a strategy of temporary insanity, drawing out the legal proceedings with requests for psychiatric evaluations. Despite their attempts, the court found Raphael mentally fit to stand trial. The trial, which began in October 2021, over a year after Kimberly's murder, had the promise of delivering justice. However, the outcome left Kimberly's family heartbroken. Despite overwhelming evidence that the crime was premeditated, Raphael was sentenced to just 14 years in prison, a sentence later reduced to 13. His defense of acting in a fit of rage spared him a life sentence, a legal maneuver that left many feeling that the justice system had failed. Meanwhile, Raphael's family was also shattered by the ordeal. His father, unable to cope with the shame and guilt of raising a son who had committed such an atrocity, took his own life just weeks before the trial began. He stepped in front of a moving train, and while Fatima insisted it had been an accident, surveillance footage showed that it had been a deliberate act. His death further deepened the tragedy of the Rodriguez family, leaving Fatima to cling to the belief that her son was innocent, a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. On the evening of July 17, 2024, an unimaginable tragedy occurred that shook the entire community of Cordoba, Argentina, to its core. In the heart of a bustling Argentine city, a young woman full of life disappeared without a trace. Her last known words, a voicemail to her boyfriend, promised that she was on her way, but she never arrived. Hours later, an abandoned car was discovered on the outskirts of the city, partially burned, with a terrible secret inside. Catalina Gutierrez was born in 2003 in the small municipality of Iras, located within the Rio Cuo department of the province of Cordoba, Argentina. She was the youngest daughter of Marcelo Gutierrez, a highly respected architect, and Eleonora Volin-Viter, who had given up her career to devote herself fully to raising Catalina and her older sister Lucia. When Catalina was still a young girl, the family made the move to Cordoba, the bustling and vibrant second-largest city in Argentina, in search of better opportunities and an enriched urban life. It was in this thriving city that Catalina spent her childhood and teenage years, growing up alongside her beloved sister Lucia. The bond between the two sisters was incredibly strong, and they remained inseparable through the years. From a young age, Catalina's bright mind and insatiable curiosity stood out. She developed a deep love for music, art, and travel. Her free time was often spent playing the guitar and singing, talents that she inherited from her father, with whom she shared a special bond. The two often collaborated on recording songs together, moments that further strengthened their already close relationship. Marcelo's influence on Catalina was profound, and his passion for architecture inspired her to follow in his footsteps. Upon finishing high school, she enrolled in the prestigious National University of Cordoba, where she began studying architecture, much like her father before her. Her friendly and outgoing nature quickly earned her a large circle of friends at university. She was known for her infectious laughter and ability to bring light to even the dullest of days. In addition to her studies, Catalina was a regular presence on social media. She frequently posted updates about her life, sharing glimpses of her adventures, her adorable dog, and her nights out with friends. Music was a key feature of her online presence, with videos of her singing often garnering significant attention. Though it was just a hobby, Catalina's authentic charm and warmth attracted a sizable following. By 2024, she had amassed over 115,000 followers on Instagram and another 47,000 on TikTok. Despite the attention she received online, Catalina remained grounded, never letting her growing social media influence interfere with her core values. Family, friends, and her future in architecture were her main priorities. At the start of 2024, Catalina began dating a fellow student, Ezekiel, who also attended the National University of Cordoba. Their relationship appeared happy and filled with affection. Friends and family saw them as a promising young couple, noting the love and respect they seemed to have for one another. No one could have foreseen the tragic turn that their relationship would eventually take. On that fateful July evening, Catalina borrowed her mother's car, a second-generation Renault Clio, intending to spend the night bowling with Ezekiel and other college friends at the local mall. With her university studies set to resume soon, she wanted to make the most of her remaining days of summer break. Her mother, Eleonora, although always concerned for her daughter's safety when they went out at night, trusted Catalina's judgment. After all, the plan was simple: just an evening of bowling with friends in a well-frequented part of town. Catalina promised her mother she would check in throughout the night and let her know when she was on her way home. While Eleonora felt a pang of motherly anxiety as her daughter left, she could never have predicted that this would be the last time she would see her youngest child alive. Catalina agreed to her mother's conditions without hesitation, offering reassuring words before stepping out of the door. She understood Eleonora's concern but didn't think too much of it. After all, it was just a night out with friends, something she'd done countless times before. It was around 9 p.m. when she left the house in her mother's car, excited for the fun night ahead. As she slid into the driver's seat, she sent a voice message to her boyfriend, Ezekiel, letting him know she was on her way and asking him to wait for her in the mall's parking lot. The plan was simple: bowling with friends, a night of laughter and unwinding. But as fate would have it, Catalina never made it to the mall. At first, Ezekiel and her friends didn't think much of her tardiness. Perhaps she was stuck in traffic, or maybe she had made a quick stop along the way. The drive from Catalina's house to the mall was typically a short one, no more than 15 minutes. However, as time passed and Catalina still hadn't shown up, concern began to grow. 30 minutes had already gone by, double the time it should have taken her, and there was no sign of her. Her friends began calling her phone, but each call went unanswered. With each passing minute, their worry increased. Frantically, they sent message after message, but still, nothing. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Ezekiel, now on edge, decided to reach out to Catalina's sister, Lucia, hoping she might know something. He dialed her number, the tension palpable in his voice as he asked if Catalina had perhaps returned home. But Lucia, equally confused and now alarmed, said she hadn't heard from her sister all evening. The unsettling news sent a wave of panic through Lucia, and she quickly informed their mother, Eleonora. As the hours passed and no word came from Catalina, Eleonora's unease grew. Soon, their father Marcelo returned home, only to be greeted by a distraught Eleonora explaining the situation. Marcelo immediately began trying to call Catalina, but every attempt went straight to voicemail, deepening the sense of dread. By now, hours had passed without a word from their daughter, and fear gripped the family. The Gutierrez, consumed with worry, decided it was time to act. They rushed to the local police station, desperately hoping the authorities could help them locate Catalina. Meanwhile, Ezekiel and Catalina's friends arrived at the station as well, sharing what little they knew in hopes that it would lead to answers. Ezekiel played the last voice message Catalina had sent him before she disappeared, a haunting reminder of how routine the evening was supposed to be. Her friends, grasping for any clue, began reaching out to others who knew her, hoping someone had seen or heard from her. One of the first people they contacted was Nestor Daniel Aguilar, a fellow architecture student and one of Catalina's closest friends. Nestor and Catalina's friendship had blossomed after they met in 2021 when Nestor moved to Cordoba from his hometown of Bariloche, a beautiful tourist destination in the south of Argentina. Moving to Cordoba for university had been exciting but also isolating for Nestor, who didn't have any family in the city. Catalina, with her kind and generous spirit, had welcomed him into her life. She often invited him over to her home, making sure he never felt alone. He had quickly become a part of her family's inner circle, attending gatherings, sharing meals, and even getting rides to school from Catalina every day. Their friendship was so strong that Nestor had become like a brother to her, a presence her family and friends all recognized as steady and important. Given their deep bond, Catalina's friends naturally assumed that if anyone knew where she might be, it would be Nestor. But when they reached him, Nestor sounded genuinely surprised and concerned by the news of her disappearance. He hadn't spoken to Catalina that evening and had no idea where she might be. Like everyone else, Nestor was shaken by the news, immediately offering to come to the police station to help in any way he could. When Nestor arrived at the station, his distress was visible. He embraced Catalina's family, offering his condolences and pledging to support them in whatever way he could. His appearance, though heartbreaking, underscored the gravity of the situation. Amidst the flurry of activity, phone calls, statements, and the hurried organization of search efforts, Lucia suddenly remembered something crucial. Months earlier, she and Catalina had decided to activate a location-sharing feature on their phones as a safety measure. They'd both agreed that being able to track each other's whereabouts would bring peace of mind, especially when one of them was out late. This, coupled with Lucia's access to her sister's phone via shared key, could offer the breakthrough they so desperately needed. In the midst of their fear and confusion, this revelation brought a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could use this feature to pinpoint Catalina's location and uncover what had happened to her. Lucia quickly retrieved her phone and opened the location-sharing app, her heart pounding in her chest as she navigated the screen. What would she find? Where had Catalina gone after leaving the house? As everyone crowded around, holding their breath, the app began to load. This moment, full of anticipation and dread, felt like it lasted an eternity. Every second that passed without Catalina felt like a weight pressing down on her loved ones. Finally, the app opened, and Lucia's eyes scanned the map, hoping against hope that the location it revealed would bring answers rather than heartbreak. In a case like this, when panic and fear dominate, small leads like the location-sharing feature can be the difference between despair and resolution. Though they were all desperate for answers, none of them were prepared for what would come next. The tragedy that unfolded from this search was not only a devastating loss, but also the uncovering of a truth far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Catalina's disappearance was not just a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was part of a darker, hidden narrative involving betrayal and unimaginable heartbreak. When investigators began tracing Catalina's cell phone, they were led to a neighborhood known as Ampliación Kennedy, located about 2 miles from her home. The signal pinpointed a desolate area, and a police team rushed to the scene. As they approached, they came upon a shocking sight. The car Catalina had borrowed from her mother. The vehicle was partially burned, sitting abandoned in an eerily quiet remote location. The discovery of the car sent a wave of dread through the officers, who feared the worst. When they searched inside, their fears were tragically confirmed. Catalina's lifeless body lay in the back seat. There were no signs of gunshot wounds or stab marks, but it was evident from the bruising and physical signs on her body that she had been violently assaulted. Adding to the grim scene was the strong, acrid odor of alcohol that permeated the air inside the car. The seats were soaked in the flammable liquid, suggesting the perpetrator had doused the vehicle in an attempt to burn it, and possibly Catalina's body beyond recognition. However, something had thwarted this gruesome plan. The fire had burned for only a short time before it extinguished, likely due to the lack of oxygen inside the sealed vehicle. Although Catalina's body had sustained burns, the flames had gone out before causing more extensive damage. Her remains were immediately sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death, while forensic investigators combed the vehicle for any clues that could shed light on who had committed this horrific crime. As the heartbreaking news spread, Catalina's family and friends were plunged into a state of utter despair. Nestor, one of her closest friends, seemed particularly affected by the tragedy. He was seen weeping uncontrollably, mourning alongside Catalina's grieving parents, Marcelo and Eleonora. It was a deeply emotional time for all who had known Catalina. Her sudden and violent death left everyone struggling to comprehend the enormity of their loss. The police, meanwhile, began their investigation with a sense of urgency, determined to bring the perpetrator to justice. They quickly ruled out robbery as a motive since all of Catalina's belongings, her phone, wallet, and personal items, were still in the car, untouched. Instead, they began to focus on the possibility that the crime was personal, perhaps an act of revenge, or driven by a more intimate motive. In an effort to gather information, the police began calling in those closest to Catalina for questioning. They interviewed her family members, her friends, and her boyfriend, Ezekiel, hoping to uncover anything that could point them toward the truth. As the investigation progressed, one person in particular stood out: Nestor. His emotional response at the news of Catalina's death had initially seemed genuine, but there was something about his behavior that investigators found unsettling. When it was Nestor's turn to give a statement, he claimed that he had been at home all night, insisting that he hadn't left the house. His account seemed plausible at first, but as investigators delved deeper into his story, they began to notice small inconsistencies. Sensing something was off, the police requested to take a closer look at Nestor's cell phone data. Surprisingly, Nestor complied without much protest and handed over his phone for further investigation. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious, but when investigators analyzed the GPS data from his phone, they made a critical discovery. The data showed that Nestor had been in the exact area where Catalina's body was found on the night of her death, directly contradicting his claim of having stayed home all evening. Armed with this damning evidence, police officers arrived at Nestor's home and asked him to come back to the station for further questioning. Back at the police station, Nestor was once again asked to clarify his whereabouts on the night of the murder. He stuck to his original story, repeating that he had been at home the entire time. But as the pressure mounted, Nestor's composure began to crumble. He grew visibly nervous, fidgeting with his hands, his voice faltering as he responded to the questions. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and he avoided eye contact with the officers. Realizing that he was backed into a corner, Nestor hesitated for several long moments before changing his story. He now claimed that around 8 p.m., on the night in question, he had gone out briefly to practice martial arts and then returned home afterward. However, investigators were not convinced. They pressed him further, asking if he had spoken with Catalina that day, or if he was aware of her plans to meet Ezekiel and their friends at the mall. Nestor again denied having any knowledge of her plans, but the investigators already knew this was a lie. One of Catalina's friends had told the police that she had invited Nestor to join them that evening. Catalina had specifically asked him to come along, wanting to spend time with him and the group. Confronted with this information, Nestor's demeanor shifted dramatically. His face grew pale, his hands trembled, and after a long, tense silence, he finally broke down. Nestor confessed. The words came tumbling out as if they had been bottled up for far too long. He admitted to being in love with Catalina, describing her as the woman he had longed for but could never have. His infatuation with her had grown over time, and it had slowly morphed into an unhealthy obsession. Unable to cope with the fact that Catalina did not return his feelings and that she had chosen to be with Ezekiel, Nestor had snapped. In a fit of jealousy and rage, he had lured Catalina into a deadly trap. What had started as a night of friendship and fun had turned into a nightmare when Nestor attacked Catalina in a jealous frenzy. As the chilling details of his confession unfolded, Nestor revealed how he had doused the car with alcohol in a panicked attempt to destroy the evidence, including Catalina's body. But his plan had failed, and the partially burned car had become the key to unraveling the truth. The investigators listened carefully to every word, horrified at the depth of his betrayal. Once Nestor had finished speaking, they informed him that he would need legal representation, and the formal process of charging him with Catalina's murder began. At that point, the police had already identified Nestor as the perpetrator, but much remained unknown. They needed to uncover the full dynamics of the crime to understand what had driven him to commit such a heinous act. Nestor was taken into preventive custody, but no further details were released as the investigation deepened. His confession sent shockwaves through Catalina's friends and family, many of whom were in disbelief. Some suspected that Nestor's admission might be a result of confusion or grief, perhaps stemming from his own shock over Catalina's death. It was hard for those closest to him to believe that the quiet, kind friend they had known could be capable of such a terrible act. No one was more devastated than Catalina's parents. They had always treated Nestor with warmth, welcoming him into their home as if he were a member of the family. Losing their daughter in such a brutal way was already unbearable. But discovering that the person responsible was someone so close, someone Catalina trusted, made the pain even deeper. The betrayal was unimaginable. In an emotional interview, Marcelo Gutierrez, Catalina's father, shared how Nestor had been present during the days following Catalina's disappearance, offering support to the family. Nestor had even vowed to do everything in his power to help find her, acting completely innocent and pretending not to know where she was. He cried with the family and seemed genuinely concerned, making his later confession all the more horrifying. Lucia Gutierrez, Catalina's older sister, expressed disbelief as well, recalling how much her sister had trusted Nestor. Catalina had always spoken highly of him, and the two had formed a close bond through their shared experiences at university. Lucia emphasized that her sister had never mentioned anything about Nestor having romantic feelings for her, making his confession feel even more bewildering. The crime against Catalina Gutierrez quickly captured public attention, spreading not only throughout Cordoba, but eventually making headlines across Argentina. On social media, Catalina's followers expressed their sorrow and shock. Media outlets across the country covered the story, with news channels repeatedly broadcasting updates as details of the investigation unfolded. The case gained even more attention when other girls came forward, sharing their own disturbing encounters with Nestor. One young woman, whose identity remained anonymous, made several posts on social media revealing that she had gone to high school with Nestor. She shared that she had experienced several unsettling interactions with him during their teenage years. According to her, Nestor had stalked her throughout high school, making her feel unsafe. She had reported his behavior to the school principal, but no action was ever taken. The school's inaction only allowed Nestor's troubling behavior to continue unchecked. Another woman shared a harrowing experience with an Argentine news channel, recalling an incident that occurred during a school camp. According to her, Nestor waited until everyone in the camp was asleep before sneaking into her tent and attempting to force himself on her. The girl screamed, causing Nestor to flee in fear. However, that wasn't the end of the harassment. After that night, Nestor continued to pursue and harass her at school. She, like the first girl, reported his behavior to the school board, but her complaints were dismissed without any serious action being taken. In her interview, this second girl expressed deep regret for not going directly to the police. Neither Catalina nor her family had any inkling of Nestor's hidden darkness. To everyone in Cordoba who knew him, Nestor appeared to be the epitome of calmness, politeness, and unassuming decency. He never displayed any outward signs of malice or ill will, which made the revelations of his actions all the more devastating and incomprehensible. When the autopsy results for Catalina were finally released, the cause of her death was confirmed to be suffocation, though it remained unclear whether she had been suffocated by hand or with an object. Catalina's body bore the unmistakable marks of aggression, her face and arms showing signs of a violent struggle. However, investigators found no evidence of sexual assault, dispelling at least one horrifying possibility. What became apparent, though, was the chilling fact that Catalina had already been dead by the time Nestor set fire to the car. This pointed to the horrifying possibility that the act was not just a crime of passion or impulse, but something more premeditated. Her body had been bound and gagged, although the exact timing of this, whether it occurred before or after her death, remained a critical detail investigators were trying to determine. If she had been bound before her death, it suggested that Nestor may have meticulously planned the crime, adding a further layer of horror to the already unspeakable tragedy. As the investigation unfolded and the truth became clearer, Catalina's family found themselves grappling with the unbearable weight of preparing for her funeral. Originally, her family had intended to cremate her body and spread her ashes in Iras, her birthplace, but those plans had to be postponed as the authorities continued to keep the body for further analysis, ensuring no detail was overlooked in the investigation. During this emotionally draining time, Catalina's older sister, Lucia, turned to social media as a way to cope and pay tribute to her beloved sibling. In a heart-wrenching video, Lucia compiled a series of cherished photos of the two sisters, highlighting the deep bond they shared. Over the montage, Lucia's voice trembled as she poured out her grief and called for justice in a deeply personal letter to her departed sister.
You couldn't have been a better sister. Now we are two in one person, and wherever you are, I hope you are at peace. Never leave me alone and always help me. I will need you all my life, together in this life and in all those that lie ahead. Heaven is celebrating. I love you with all my heart, my guardian angel.
Lucia's poignant tribute resonated with thousands of people who had been following Catalina's story. The post quickly garnered an outpouring of support from friends, family members, and strangers alike. Meanwhile, as investigators delved deeper into the case, They began to piece together a chilling theory regarding the events that led to Catalina's death. Evidence pointed to the possibility that Nestor had lured Catalina to his apartment, pretending that he wanted to join her and their friends at the mall. This theory gained traction as police began reviewing security footage from near Nestor's apartment and the location where Catalina's car was eventually found. One key piece of evidence was a surveillance video captured in front of Nestor's building. In this grainy footage, investigators saw Nestor carrying Catalina's lifeless body to the Renault Clio, the same car in which she would be found hours later. Nestor was shown placing her in the back seat, confirming that he had been involved in moving her body. Another crucial video surfaced from a street camera, capturing Nestor driving the car along a deserted road at approximately 10:23 p.m. The road led directly to the isolated spot where the car would later be abandoned, partially burned, with Catalina's body left inside. These haunting images became pivotal in the investigation, solidifying Nestor's involvement and providing a clear picture of his cold, calculated actions that night. The footage painted a devastating narrative. This was not an impulsive crime, but a premeditated act of betrayal by someone Catalina had once trusted. During an extensive search of Nestor's apartment, police uncovered several key pieces of evidence that further implicated him in Catalina's tragic death. Among the most significant discoveries was a ring that belonged to Catalina. However, investigators were left questioning whether she had left the ring there voluntarily during a previous visit, or if Nestor had taken it from her on the night of her murder. Alongside the ring, strands of Catalina's hair were found scattered throughout the apartment, chilling proof of her presence there on the night of the crime. Inside Nestor's washing machine, authorities discovered the clothes he had worn during the attack, cementing the case against him with undeniable physical evidence. According to the investigative timeline, Catalina arrived at Nestor's apartment around 9:30 p.m. on July 17. By 10:30 p.m., Nestor had already abandoned the Renault Clio, nearly 2 miles from his apartment, where her body was found. The investigation also uncovered Nestor's prior knowledge of Catalina's plans that evening. She was supposed to meet her boyfriend and a group of friends at the mall for a casual bowling night. Catalina, ever trusting, had even asked a mutual acquaintance to extend an invitation to Nestor, hoping to include him in their fun. Nestor agreed to join, and Catalina planned to pick him up at his apartment before heading to the mall. When she arrived in front of Nestor's building, she expected him to be waiting outside as they had arranged, but he was nowhere to be seen. With a premeditated excuse, Nestor convinced Catalina to come up to his apartment instead. This request, seemingly innocent, was a critical part of his carefully laid plan. Security footage from a nearby camera captured Catalina leaving her vehicle and entering Nestor's building, unaware that this would be her final act of trust. Inside his apartment, it is believed that Nestor made an advance on Catalina. Whether it was an attempt to kiss her or something more aggressive remains unclear. What is known, however, is that Catalina rejected him, igniting a volatile confrontation. Overcome by a toxic combination of frustration, humiliation, and jealousy, Nestor violently attacked Catalina, striking her until she was unconscious. Ultimately, he suffocated her, sealing her tragic fate. Whether Nestor immediately realized the full consequences of his actions is still unclear, but he took steps to conceal his crime. In a disturbing display of either panic or premeditation, he bound and gagged Catalina's body, possibly in an attempt to stage a different narrative or simply out of desperation. Nestor then placed her lifeless body into the back seat of the Renault Clio and drove to an isolated location where he tried to destroy all evidence by setting the vehicle on fire. He soaked the interior with alcohol, confident that the ensuing blaze would erase all traces of his brutal crime. However, Nestor made a critical miscalculation. He shut the doors and rolled up the windows, depriving the flames of oxygen. The fire extinguished itself before it could consume the car, leaving behind a trove of untouched evidence, including Catalina's body. After abandoning the car, Nestor returned to his apartment as though nothing had happened, carrying on with a disturbingly calm demeanor. The mounting evidence against him, including the items found in his apartment, the contradictions in his statements, and the damning security footage led to his formal arrest. Nestor was charged with the murder of Catalina Gutierrez, and as the investigation continued to unfold, his guilt appeared inescapable. Although the authorities were close to wrapping up the investigation with Nestor Aguilar identified as the sole suspect responsible for Catalina's brutal death, new information emerged that suggested others may have been involved in the crime. A key witness, who lived near the spot where Nestor abandoned the Renault Clio, came forward with a startling report. On the night of the murder, the witness claimed to have overheard a heated argument right outside his home. The voices were debating whether or not to set the car on fire. Unfortunately, the witness could not see the individuals involved and only heard their voices, leaving their identities unknown. This new testimony, combined with additional security camera footage from nearby streets, raised fresh questions for investigators. The surveillance footage in question showed Nestor driving Catalina's car, the Renault Clio, and turning a corner at precisely 11:05 p.m. However, just 3 minutes later, another vehicle appeared on the same street and parked beside Nestor's car, which contained Catalina's body. In the footage, a man could be seen exiting this second vehicle and approaching the Renault Clio. Though the camera didn't capture any clear details of their interaction, it was obvious that the two men spoke briefly before the unidentified man returned to his own car. Shortly after this exchange, Nestor was seen setting fire to the Renault Clio and then calmly walking away from the scene. One crucial detail from this newly uncovered evidence contradicted Nestor's original account of the events that transpired. Nestor had claimed that, after abandoning the car, he walked back to his apartment. However, the distance between where the car was left and his apartment is roughly 2 miles, a journey that would take at least 25 minutes on foot. Strangely, Nestor returned to his apartment in just 5 minutes, far too short a time for him to have walked. This discrepancy led investigators to believe that someone in the second vehicle may have given him a ride, raising the possibility that Nestor had an accomplice that night. Whether this unknown individual's involvement was limited to providing transportation or extended to a more direct role in Catalina's murder remains uncertain. Despite the growing evidence suggesting that Nestor may have had help, he continues to maintain his innocence regarding the involvement of anyone else. He insists that he acted entirely on his own, claiming that the decision to kill Catalina and burn the car was solely his. Still, the authorities are not convinced by his denials and continue to pursue all leads to identify the man seen in the security footage. Investigators are particularly focused on tracking down this potential accomplice, hoping that he might provide crucial details that could either corroborate Nestor's claims or expose a wider conspiracy. As new pieces of the puzzle emerged, the investigation took on a new urgency, with many fearing that more individuals could have played a part in the crime or its aftermath. What had initially seemed like a tragic, solitary act of betrayal was now potentially unfolding into a much darker and more complex conspiracy. Investigators are working to explore every lead, examining whether the unidentified man in the footage had any prior connection to Nestor or even Catalina herself. As the investigation remains active, Nestor Daniel Aguilar continues to be held in a medium security facility in Argentina. His trial is expected to commence either by the end of 2024 or in the early months of 2025. If convicted, Nestor faces the possibility of receiving the harshest punishment allowed under Argentine law, life imprisonment. When officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrific sight. What lay beyond the threshold was the stuff of nightmares, a scene so horrific it would haunt even the most seasoned officers for years to come. The apartment was in utter disarray, as if a violent tornado had swept through the rooms. Blood was everywhere. It streaked across the walls in dark crimson smears, pooled ominously on the floorboards, and soaked deeply into the mattress of the bed. As the officers moved further into the bedroom, the full horror was revealed. Beneath a blood-soaked sheet, they discovered Christina Kraft's lifeless body. Rigor mortis had already set in, her limbs stiff and unyielding. Her body bore the marks of a relentless and frenzied assault, a chilling reflection of the rage. Christina Carlin Kraft was born on July 11, 1981, into a close-knit, loving, and resilient family. Her early years were filled with warmth, support, and the bonds of a household that valued unity. However, tragedy struck in 1990 when Christina was just 9 years old. Her mother, who had been a pillar of strength and nurturing care in the family, passed away unexpectedly. This devastating loss left an indelible mark on young Christina, forever shaping her perspective on family and life. Her father, a strong and determined man, decided to raise Christina and her brother and sister on his own. For years, he managed to balance the responsibilities of work and parenthood, ensuring his children never lacked for love. Eventually, however, he remarried, hoping to bring stability and a sense of completeness back into their lives. With the arrival of a new stepmother, life changed again for Christina. The stepmother brought her own children from previous relationships into the fold, and what had once been a small, tightly knit family almost doubled. Navigating the dynamics of a blended family wasn't always easy, but it instilled in Christina an ability to adapt, compromise, and forge her own path. After completing high school, Christina ventured into the workforce, securing a job as a waitress at a bustling casino along the coast. Though this job was far from glamorous, it was a formative experience for her. She learned invaluable life lessons about hard work, resilience, and dealing with people from all walks of life. But Christina had dreams that far exceeded the confines of the casino floor. Her striking appearance, undeniable charm, and magnetic personality often drew attention, and Christina had always envisioned herself in a different light. She dreamed of becoming a successful model, a face admired on the glossy pages of prestigious fashion magazines. The summer of 2003 would prove to be a turning point in Christina's life. The coastal region where she worked was undergoing rapid transformation. Approximately $1 million had been invested into the area's infrastructure to turn it into a thriving, high-end resort destination. This development began attracting the elite, including wealthy investors, entrepreneurs, and socialites. Among them was Alex Chiatelli, a prominent and highly successful banker with a keen eye for opportunity and beauty. From the moment Alex saw Christina, it was as if fate had intervened in him. They fell deeply in love, bonding over shared dreams and mutual admiration. Over the next 14 years, Christina and Alex built a life together that many would envy. They were inseparable, living as a family even though they never formalized their relationship through marriage. Despite their love, Christina chose to delay having children, remaining laser-focused on her ambitions. She was determined to make her mark in the competitive world of modeling. Alex, ever supportive, encouraged her dreams wholeheartedly. His unwavering belief in her talent gave Christina the confidence to push forward in pursuit of her goals. Even as a child, Christina had dabbled in modeling, participating in small projects and amateur photo shoots. However, as her confidence grew, so did the opportunities. Gradually, offers began to flow in more steadily, allowing Christina to establish herself as a sought-after model. Her captivating beauty and ability to connect with the camera led to her work being featured in several popular publications. The more exposure Christina gained, the more her popularity soared. Her calendar quickly filled with photo shoots, casting calls, and opportunities that once seemed like distant dreams. But despite her growing success, Christina's ultimate aspiration remained unfulfilled. She wanted to grace the pages of magazine she considered to be the pinnacle of a model's career. For Christina, appearing in magazine was not just about fame. It was about proving to herself and others that she could compete with the very best. Determined to make her dream a reality, Christina joined the thousands of hopeful applicants who submitted their portfolios to the editorial team. For years, she waited and worked tirelessly, striving to build a portfolio that would set her apart. Finally, in 2009, her perseverance paid off. Christina received a phone call that would change her life. She had been chosen as Girl of the Week, a prestigious opportunity that would see her photos published alongside a short biography in magazine as part of a special feature. For Christina, this was the moment she had been waiting for, a significant step toward achieving her dream. The photo shoot took place on May 4th, 2009, and it was nothing short of a success. Christina dazzled the camera with her confidence and beauty, delivering a set of images that were both elegant and alluring. While this feature was not the coveted cover or center spread, she had long envisioned, it was a breakthrough nonetheless. With her newfound association with magazine, Christina's world expanded rapidly. She began attending exclusive events, mingling with Hollywood celebrities, and enjoying opportunities she had only ever dreamed of. Yet in the competitive hierarchy of magazine models, she remained on the lower rungs, a position that fueled her determination to climb even higher. Christina remained confident that it was only a matter of time before she would stand alongside the magazine's most iconic and celebrated models. Unfortunately, Christina soon encountered a harsh reality that many models face: age. At the time of her magazine debut, she was already 26 years old, a milestone that the magazine's standards viewed as nearing the upper limit for fresh talent. In an industry notorious for its emphasis on youth, Christina's chances of achieving her ultimate dream began to fade. Despite her relentless efforts, her modeling career began to lose momentum, ultimately ending as quickly as it had begun. But Christina was not one to surrender easily. A woman of ambition and vision, she pivoted her focus, determined to find success in other areas of life. Yet, her connection to magazine proved to be a double-edged sword. While the magazine had granted her a taste of fame, its controversial reputation cast a shadow over her professional pursuits. Major brands and reputable publications, wary of the magazine's provocative image, began to turn Christina away. She attended countless auditions, interviews, and meetings across the United States, only to be met with rejection time and again. At the same time, Christina began to understand that popularity brought its own set of challenges and dangers. After the publication, Christina found herself the target of relentless stalkers who became increasingly bold and invasive. At first, the incidents were minor: unwanted messages, suspicious vehicles parked near her home, and occasional confrontations in public. However, the situation escalated quickly. Threatening notes began appearing on her car windshield, and unknown individuals followed her as she went about her day. Alex Chiotelli, deeply concerned for Christina's safety, urged her to step away from the modeling industry entirely. He believed it had brought them more danger than happiness. After weeks of convincing, Christina finally agreed to leave behind her modeling career and relocate with Alex to the quiet and affluent suburb of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. There, in a peaceful and upscale neighborhood, the couple hoped to find sanctuary. On August 21, 2018, Alex left for a routine business trip to New York City. He had traveled often for work, and the couple was accustomed to brief periods apart. That evening, as was his habit, Alex called Christina to say goodnight. She didn't answer. Initially, he didn't worry. Christina was known for her active lifestyle and busy schedule. Perhaps she was in the shower, out for a late walk, or had simply fallen asleep early. He decided to try again in the morning, but the next morning brought only silence. Alex dialed Christina's number multiple times, but her phone remained unresponsive. This was deeply uncharacteristic of her. She always kept her phone nearby and made a point of staying in contact. Yet Alex's packed day of meetings left him little time to dwell on his unease. By evening, however, his concern turned to outright panic. He had called Christina dozens of times, but still, there was no answer. An oppressive feeling of dread settled over him. Something was terribly wrong. Alex abandoned all his plans and immediately made his way back to Ardmore. Arriving at their shared apartment around 9 p.m., Alex's anxiety spiked when he found that his key would not unlock the door. At first, he thought the lock might be jammed or the door blocked from the inside. He pounded on the door, calling Christina's name, but there was no response. His phone remained eerily silent, and all signs pointed to something being terribly amiss. With no other options, Alex called the police. The local law enforcement, familiar with the quiet and affluent neighborhood, were slow to react initially. Such areas rarely experienced serious crimes, and officers were accustomed to responding to false alarms or petty complaints. However, the dispatcher's attitude shifted when they checked the address. Just 4 days earlier, Christina had filed a police report about a break-in at the very same apartment. While nothing had been stolen, she had mentioned feeling like someone had been inside. Moving items, leaving subtle signs of their presence. A patrol unit was dispatched immediately. Upon arrival, the officers found Alex pacing anxiously outside the apartment, visibly distressed. After attempting the door themselves and confirming it was locked, they made the decision to force entry. The door splintered under their combined effort, and what awaited them beyond the threshold would haunt them forever. The apartment was in utter chaos. Furniture had been overturned, cushions slashed open, and personal items scattered as if someone had been searching frantically for something. The destruction pointed to either a violent struggle or a psychotic outburst. But the horror truly unfolded when the officers entered the bedroom. Blood was everywhere. It stained the walls, seeped into the floorboards, and saturated the bed. Underneath a crimson-soaked sheet, the officers found Christina's lifeless body. Rigor mortis had already begun to set in, and the extent of her injuries was beyond anything they had seen before. Her face had been disfigured so severely that she was barely recognizable. Her nose had been crushed into. The bones in her face had been smashed, as though her attacker had stomped on her repeatedly with unrelenting rage. Cuts, bruises, and abrasions covered her body, evidence of a prolonged and merciless assault. Around her neck were clear signs of strangulation. The ligature marks suggested that a foreign object, possibly clothing or an electrical cord, had been used to end her life. However, the weapon was nowhere to be found. For investigators, this detail raised chilling questions. Had the killer brought the weapon, or had they taken it with them afterward? Either way, the ferocity of the attack left no doubt that Christina's murderer had acted out of a deep, uncontrolled rage. Naturally, Alex became the first suspect. As Christina's partner, the police knew they needed to question him immediately. He was brought to the station, where his visible shock and grief only deepened. Over the course of an hour and a half, detectives carefully examined his alibi. Fortunately for Alex, it was ironclad. Phone records, surveillance footage, and testimonies from colleagues confirmed that he had been in New York City the entire time. Reluctantly, the police were forced to rule him out, but this left them with a chilling problem. The case now had no clear suspects. The investigation intensified. The eerie connection between Christina's earlier report of a break-in and her murder could not be ignored. Detectives believed that the intruder from 4 days prior had returned, this time with far deadlier intentions. The police were convinced that these two incidents were connected. At the time of Christina's murder, the investigation into the recent robbery was still ongoing, and detectives had just started analyzing crucial CCTV footage. Previously, investigators had spoken with Christina, and their joint efforts made it possible to reconstruct the chain of events that preceded the unpleasant incident in the apartment. It was revealed that on Friday, August 17th, Christina had spent the evening at a popular bar in the city center. Known for her love of socializing, she had been out with friends, but something about that night was different. Around 3 in the morning, Christina returned home. The following morning, on August 18, Christina Kraft awoke with a throbbing, unbearable headache. She was disoriented and shocked to discover herself lying sprawled on the floor of her own apartment. Confusion and dread set in as Christina struggled to recall the events of the previous night. She vividly remembered having just a few drinks at the bar, certainly not enough to cause complete memory loss or render her unconscious. Christina, sharp and intuitive, became convinced that someone had slipped a substance into her drink. Determined to piece the night together, she began examining her apartment. As she looked around, the disarray in the room became impossible to ignore. Panic turned to grim realization. Several valuable possessions were missing. Designer handbags, luxury shoes, jewelry, and credit cards had all been taken. Desperate to understand what had happened, Christina recounted the only detail she could remember. She had been driven home that night by a young African-American taxi driver, roughly 30 years old. This lead seemed insignificant at first, but the investigation soon unearthed a more chilling narrative. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from the cameras positioned outside Christina's apartment building, and what they saw shocked them. The footage showed Christina's arrival in a taxi at approximately 3 a.m. As soon as Christina stepped out of the vehicle, she visibly lost consciousness, collapsing onto the sidewalk. The driver, the same young man Christina described, was seen dragging her limp body back into the cab's back seat. Moments later, the man appeared to retrieve Christina's keys. He then made his way into her apartment building, leaving the incapacitated woman behind in the car. Once inside the apartment, the driver stayed for over an hour. Surveillance footage from nearby showed him struggling to carry a large, heavy box out of the building upon his departure. The effort it took to move the box suggested that it was filled with stolen items, likely the valuables Christina later discovered missing. After securing the stolen goods in his taxi, woke Christina and physically assisted her up to her apartment. With unsettling nonchalance, he then drove away, leaving behind no immediate trace of his intrusion. Upon reviewing this footage, law enforcement officials turned to the public for help. They released still images of the suspect, pleading with anyone who recognized him to come forward with information. At the same time, investigators began delving into Christina's personal history, hoping to uncover other clues that might explain why she had been targeted. It wasn't long before the police stumbled upon a significant incident from Christina's past. In 2016, she had made headlines when police were called to an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Christina had reportedly been involved in a heated altercation with the restaurant manager, which escalated when she struck the employee multiple times. She was arrested at the scene, though the matter was later resolved with Alex's intervention. Christina received probation for 6 months, and the incident was largely forgotten. The police briefly entertained the possibility of revenge, suspecting that the altercation could have left someone with a grudge. However, this theory was quickly ruled out. The most significant lead came when detectives began revisiting Christina's early modeling career. Her appearance in magazine had earned her both fame and unwanted attention. It was well known that models, especially those associated with provocative magazines, often attracted stalkers. Investigators discovered that Christina maintained multiple profiles on platforms related to the modeling industry, which could have made it easier for someone to track her down. Meanwhile, the police followed another crucial lead: Christina's stolen credit cards. Bank statements revealed that the cards had been used hours after her murder at a small grocery store located near her apartment. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed the identity of the user, the same taxi driver who had been recorded outside Christina's building. With this breakthrough, investigators identified the suspect as Andre Melton, a man with a long and disturbing criminal record. The young man was prone to violence and had repeatedly attacked women. Detectives swiftly obtained a search warrant for Andre Melton's home, along with an arrest warrant for burglary. When law enforcement officers arrived at the address, however, Andre was nowhere to be found. It appeared he had fled the scene, evading capture for the time being. Despite his absence, investigators conducted a thorough search of his home. During the operation, they uncovered most of the stolen items from Christina's apartment. But the police were no longer worried about this. It was necessary to detain the dangerous criminal and prove his involvement in the murder. Around this time, the autopsy report was finalized, and its findings were even more gruesome than anticipated. The medical examiner's report detailed the horrifying extent of Christina's injuries. 22 facial bones were broken. Areas not shattered or crushed were covered with deep bruising from the violent beating she had endured. As the police continued to comb through hours of surveillance footage, a shocking new discovery came to light. In additional footage from the night before Christina's murder, another man appeared alongside her. At approximately 3 a.m., Christina was captured on camera entering her apartment building in the company of an unidentified stranger. The man, also African American, and seemingly around the same age as Andre Melton, bore no resemblance to the taxi driver who had previously robbed her. The footage showed both Christina and the stranger entering the building, but curiously, there was no evidence of the man leaving through the front entrance. This anomaly triggered further investigation, and detectives soon discovered a suspicious activity log from the building's security system. At precisely 5:20 a.m., the balcony doors in Christina's apartment registered as having been opened and then closed. Because Christina and Alex's unit was located on the first floor, it was entirely plausible that the stranger had slipped out undetected through the balcony. With this information, police placed the man on the wanted list. The operation gained significant traction due to the high-quality surveillance footage, which allowed for an incredibly detailed image of the suspect's face. Investigators disseminated the footage widely through media outlets, urging the public to provide any information that could help identify and locate the man. The public appeal yielded results faster than anticipated. On August 22, a breakthrough occurred when Andre Melton himself made a shocking call to the police station. Seeing his own photo plastered across television screens alongside the image of the unidentified suspect, Andre felt compelled to clarify his involvement. Over the phone, he admitted to having robbed Christina on August 18th, but vehemently denied any connection to her murder. Andre insisted that while he had stolen from her apartment after substances her, he had not killed her. Despite his confession to burglary, Andre refused to surrender to authorities, fearing he would be falsely charged with the far graver crime of murder. The investigation took another turn when another taxi driver approached the police with crucial information. The driver claimed that shortly before Christina's tragic death, he had picked her up along with an African-American man matching the description of the wanted suspect. According to the driver, Christina had flagged him down on the road rather than hailing a ride through an app. This detail immediately struck investigators as significant. It suggested Christina may have been deliberately trying to avoid leaving a digital trail. The taxi driver recalled that Christina appeared visibly anxious during the ride. She explained to him that a group of men had been harassing her on the street, and the stranger had intervened to defend her. Christina, seemingly grateful, asked the man to accompany her home. During the ride, the stranger behaved calmly, even assuring the driver that he would pay for the trip upon arrival and leave a $100 tip if the driver waited outside for 15 minutes. While the arrangement seemed odd, the driver agreed to it. Once they arrived at the apartment, Christina and the man entered the building, and the driver waited outside as instructed. 15 minutes passed, then 30. No one returned, and the promised payment never materialized. Frustrated and realizing he had been deceived, the driver eventually left without further action. Despite his irritation, he remembered the details clearly, and his account added a critical piece to the puzzle. The case took yet another dramatic twist on October 26th, when police received a report from a new witness. This individual, a former patient at a psychiatric hospital, recognized the wanted second man's photo in the news. He explained to detectives that he had briefly shared a ward with the suspect just days before Christina's murder. The man, described as highly aggressive and prone to violent outbursts, had been admitted to the psychiatric facility after attacking a woman. The aggressive man was kept in a psychiatric hospital for 3 days. According to the witness, an unnervingly disturbing conversation took place during his brief time with the suspect while they shared a psychiatric ward. The man described how the stranger openly and chillingly confessed to having killed a woman before. With a twisted sense of satisfaction, he recounted how he enjoyed strangling his victims, expressing with terrifying delight that there was no better feeling than the convulsions of a body taking its final breaths. The casual, almost euphoric way he spoke about murder horrified the witness, who became convinced that this deranged individual was responsible for Christina's death. He told police with confidence that the man he had been confined with had been at the victim's house the night she was killed. This critical statement was a significant break for investigators. The police immediately visited the psychiatric clinic to identify the mysterious patient, hoping this would provide the missing link to solve the case. However, their hopes were quickly dashed. When they requested the man's records, they were stunned to discover that the suspect had given a false name: John Doe. The clinic had not only released a deeply dangerous man with a clear inclination for violence, but had also failed to establish his real identity. The revelation sent shockwaves through law enforcement, highlighting serious violations in the hospital's protocols and raising questions about how such a person had been allowed to walk free. For a brief moment, it felt as though the investigation had hit yet another dead end. Leads were running dry, and detectives were left grappling with the elusive nature of their suspect. However, on August 29th, a significant breakthrough occurred, and it came on the same day as Christina's funeral. As her friends and family mourned the tragic loss of the 36-year-old model, a man approached the police with an important piece of information. He confessed to being related to the suspects seen in the surveillance footage and provided the police with information. The man's name was Jonathan Wesley Harris, a 31-year-old career criminal and known substances dealer who had only recently been released from prison after serving time for a particularly serious offense. While the relative could not confirm Jonathan Wesley's exact whereabouts, the police now had a name and a face to work with. Investigators wasted no time reaching out to anyone who might have had contact with Jonathan Wesley. After several calls, they managed to speak with Jonathan's sister. Reluctantly, she revealed that Jonathan Wesley had fled Philadelphia and was heading to Pittsburgh by bus. This information triggered an urgent response from law enforcement. Detectives alerted their counterparts in Pittsburgh, warning them that a dangerous fugitive was heading their way. The Pittsburgh police acted swiftly, coordinating patrols and deploying officers to the city's main bus station. The area was secured and surrounded in anticipation of Jonathan Wesley's arrival. When the bus finally pulled in, law enforcement officers were ready. Passengers began disembarking one by one. Jonathan Wesley, the prime suspect, was the third person to step off the bus. He barely had time to react before he was surrounded, apprehended, and escorted into custody. The manhunt had finally ended. Inside the interrogation room, Jonathan Wesley appeared calm at first. When detectives presented him with a photograph of Christina Kraft, he admitted to knowing her. According to Jonathan Wesley, they had met in a bar on the night of August 17th. He claimed the two struck up an easy conversation, fueled by alcohol and substances, which eventually led them to leave the bar together. In his version of events, Jonathan Wesley offered Christina substances he had purchased that evening, under the expectation that she would repay him through intimate favors. Jonathan Wesley insisted that Christina had voluntarily agreed to go to her home, and that the two traveled to her apartment in a taxi together. Jonathan Wesley's story later started to change. He alleged that once they arrived at Christina's apartment, she reneged on the deal. When he demanded $1,200 as payment for the substances he had provided, Christina refused, claiming she never asked for the substances in the first place. According to Jonathan Wesley, this disagreement led to a heated verbal argument. Christina allegedly became aggressive, grabbing a bottle of wine and striking Jonathan Wesley on the head, which left him bleeding. Jonathan Wesley claimed that in confusion and anger, he retaliated by hitting Christina back and then carried her to the bedroom. There, Christina Kraft began to regain consciousness. Dazed and disoriented, her senses sharpened just enough to recognize the immediate danger she was in, and she screamed for help. The sudden sound sent Jonathan Wesley into a panic. He realized that Christina's cries could alert neighbors or, worse, bring the police to her door. Already consumed by fear of legal consequences, Jonathan Wesley grew more erratic. His primal instincts took over, and in his agitated state, he decided he had to silence her. When Christina resisted his attempts to subdue her, Jonathan's frustration escalated into violence. Desperate to stop her from fighting back, he tied her wrists tightly and anchored her to the bed, rendering her defenseless. He claimed to have calmed down, at least for a fleeting moment, and assured Christina that he would untie her and leave peacefully if she stopped screaming. Christina agreed, but it was a deception. As soon as she was freed, she immediately rushed to the door. But Jonathan Wesley was faster. He caught her before she could escape and dragged her back to the bedroom. Rage consumed him. He forced her onto the bed, his fists raining down with relentless fury. Each blow landed harder than the last, driven by a toxic mix of panic, anger, and sadistic violence. Jonathan repeatedly screamed for Christina to be quiet, as though blaming her for his own uncontrollable actions. But Christina fought until her body could no longer endure. Jonathan stopped only when the room fell disturbingly still. Jonathan admitted that at this point, he realized Christina's breathing had become irregular, shallow, strained, and unnatural. Panic gripped him again. Though his brutal attack had rendered Christina near lifeless, he was suddenly terrified of what he had done. Jonathan claimed that he turned her over, trying to assess if she was conscious, and she weakly asked him for her phone. According to his statement, She pleaded to call her father for help. Jonathan handed her the device, but when he saw her attempting to dial 911 instead, he snapped. In his paranoia and desperation to escape responsibility, Jonathan lunged at her again, strangling her with his bare hands. He claimed he only wanted to render her unconscious and make her stop, but his actions were fatal. He insisted that when he stopped, Christina was still alive, a weak, self-serving attempt to minimize his responsibility. Unable to look at the horrific damage he had inflicted, Jonathan covered Christina's battered body with a sheet. In a final, calculated move, he rummaged through the apartment for valuables, not for any substantial gain, but to fund his escape. He stole several items of clothing to change out of his blood-stained outfit and left the apartment through the balcony, ensuring he avoided detection by the building's main entrance. Despite the graphic brutality of the attack, Jonathan later insisted that Christina's death had not been intentional. He blamed his violent outburst on alcohol, substances, and the events of the night spiraling out of control. His legal team, seeking to mitigate the severity of the charges, argued for manslaughter rather than murder. The prosecution, however, systematically dismantled Jonathan's defense. They pointed to his chilling confession in the psychiatric ward, where he had gleefully spoken about the pleasure he derived from strangling victims. This admission, combined with the calculated nature of the attack, painted a clear picture of intentional and sadistic violence. Furthermore, forensic evidence undermined Jonathan's claims. The toxicology report revealed no substances in Christina's system, only alcohol, debunking his assertion that she used illegal substances. Additionally, the absence of injuries to Jonathan's head contradicted his story that Christina had hit him with a wine bottle in self-defense. The prosecution's closing arguments were damning. Even if Jonathan's Wesley version of events were taken at face value, they argued, nothing justified the ferocity of his attack. Ultimately, the jury agreed with the prosecution. Jonathan Wesley Harris was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, escape, theft. The judge delivered a harsh, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder, plus an additional 22.5 years for the related charges. Robber Andre Melton, who attacked Christina 4 days before her death, was detained in December 2018. Andre Melton received a considerable term for his actions.